You're 25, but you feel 40. You're 30, but you move through the world like someone who's seen too much, lived too long, carried too much weight. Your friends are out celebrating, living recklessly, chasing dreams with the kind of wild optimism that feels foreign to you, and you're at home, exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Tired in your bones, tired in your soul. People tell you you're young. They say you have your whole life ahead of you, but inside, you feel ancient, like you've already lived several lifetimes, like some part of you aged decades ahead of your body. And the strangest part, you can't even pinpoint when it happened. You just know that somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling young. You stopped believing in the lightness that's supposed to come with youth. And now you're walking through life with the weariness of someone twice your age, wondering if anyone else feels this way or if you're just broken in some irreparable way. This is the psychology of people who feel older than their age, and it's more common than you think. There are millions of people walking around with birth certificates that say one thing and nervous systems that tell a completely different story. People whose eyes carry a heaviness that their years don't justify. People who relate more to the exhaustion of elders than the energy of their peers. And today, we're diving deep into why this happens, what it means psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. Because feeling older than you are isn't just about being mature or responsible. It's often a sign of something deeper, something that started long before you had the words to name it. Let's start with the most obvious culprit. Trauma. Not the kind of trauma that makes headlines, though sometimes it is that, but the quiet, insidious trauma that lives in everyday dysfunction. The trauma of growing up in a home where you had to be the adult. The trauma of watching a parent fall apart and knowing you had to hold everything together. The trauma of abandonment, of neglect, of having to parent yourself when you were still a child. Psychologists have a term for what happens when children are exposed to chronic stress and instability. They call it toxic stress. And it doesn't just affect you in the moment. It changes your biology. Studies show that children who experience chronic adversity, whether it's poverty, abuse, neglect, or parental dysfunction, show signs of accelerated cellular aging. Their telomeres, their protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that naturally shorten as we age, are significantly shorter than those of children who grew up in stable environments. In other words, trauma literally ages you at the cellular level. Your body starts breaking down faster. Your immune system weakens earlier. Your organs show signs of wear decades before they should. So when you say you feel older than your age, you're not being dramatic. Your body is carrying the biological burden of experiences that forced it to mature too quickly. But it's not just physical. There's a psychological aging that happens too. When you're forced to navigate adult problems as a child, your brain adapts. It has to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, gets pushed into overdrive. You learn to think strategically, to anticipate problems, to manage crises, and those are valuable skills. But they come at a cost, because while your brain is developing these survival capabilities, it's missing out on the developmental stages that are supposed to happen naturally. The play, the exploration, the freedom to make mistakes without catastrophic consequences. You skip the carefree part of childhood and jump straight into hype. And once your brain gets wired that way, it's hard to unwire it. Even when the danger passes, even when you're finally safe, your nervous system doesn't get the memo. It stays locked in that state of constant alertness, always scanning for threats, always preparing for the worst, always feeling like you need to have everything figured out because no one else is going to save you. This creates what psychologists call an old soul complex. It's the sense that you've always been older than your peers, that you could never quite relate to the frivolity and naivety of people your own age, that while everyone else was worrying about trivial things, you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And society often praises this. You're so mature for your age. You're so wise. You have an old soul. But what those compliments miss is the cost, because behind every old soul is a child who didn't get to be one. Behind every person who feels older than their age is someone who was forced to grow up too fast, who learned early that the world isn't safe, that people will let you down, that survival means being 10 steps ahead at all times. And now, even when life is relatively calm, you can't turn that off. You can't relax into the present moment because some part of you is always bracing for impact. There's another piece to this puzzle: grief. Not just the grief of losing someone, though, that can certainly age you, but the grief of losing time, of losing experiences, of watching your youth slip away while you were too busy surviving to actually live it. A study from the University of California found that people who experience significant loss or trauma in their formative years often report feeling disconnected from their chronological age. They describe feeling like they missed out on essential developmental milestones, like they were robbed of the lightness and freedom that's supposed to come with being young. And that sense of loss creates a kind of existential heaviness, a mourning for the life you didn't get to live, for the person you might have been if circumstances had been different. You look at people at your age who seem so carefree, so full of hope, and you feel like you're from a different generation entirely, like you're watching life through a window instead of living it. And that distance, that disconnection, it ages you in ways that have nothing to do with the number on your driver's license. Then there's the factor of responsibility. Some people feel older because they've been carrying adult responsibilities since they were children. Maybe you were the eldest sibling who had to raise your younger brothers and sisters. Maybe you were the breadwinner in a struggling household. Maybe you were the emotional support system for parents who should have been supporting you. Whatever the case, you learned early that your needs come last. That rest is a luxury you can't afford. That if you don't hold everything together, everything falls apart. And now, even in adulthood, you can't shake that sense of obligation. You're the friend everyone calls in a crisis, the employee who takes on extra work without being asked, the family member who shows up no matter what. And while everyone admires your reliability, no one sees how exhausting it is. How much you long to just be irresponsible for once, to make impulsive decisions, to say no without guilt, to live without the constant weight of other people's expectations pressing down on you. But you can't, because being responsible isn't just what you do. It's who you are. It's the identity you built to survive. And letting go of it feels impossible, because without it, who would you even be? Interestingly, research shows that people who feel older than their age often have a different relationship with time itself. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who report feeling older than their chronological age tend to have a more past-oriented temporal focus. They spend more time reflecting on what could have been, what went wrong. They're less likely to daydream about the future with optimism because the future has always felt uncertain, threatening, or simply like more of the same struggle. This creates a psychological heaviness. When you're constantly looking backward at losses and forward at potential disasters, you miss the present moment entirely. And the present is the only place where youth actually lives. Youth isn't about your age, it's about presence. It's about curiosity. It's about being open to possibility. But when your nervous system is stuck in survival mode, presence becomes impossible. You're always somewhere else, always in your head, always preparing, analyzing, protecting, and that mental and emotional exhaustion mimics the fatigue that comes with actual aging. There's also something to be said about the role of comparison. Social media has created a strange phenomenon where everyone's life is on display. And when you feel older than your age, scrolling through feeds of people your age living carefree lives can be devastating. You see them traveling spontaneously, making impulsive decisions, laughing without the shadow of worry in their eyes. And you wonder what's wrong with you. Why can't you be that light? Why does everything feel so heavy? But here's what you're not seeing. You're not seeing their full story. You're not seeing the privilege that might allow them to take risks you can't afford. You're not seeing the safety nets they have that you never did. You're not seeing their private struggles. And more importantly, you're comparing their external performance to your internal experience. You're comparing their highlight reel to your behind-the-scenes exhaustion. And that's not a fair comparison. But it reinforces this feeling that you're somehow defective, that everyone else got the manual for how to be young and carefree and you missed it, that you're fundamentally different in a way that isolates you from your peers. Let's talk about what this looks like in everyday life. If you feel older than your age, you might struggle with spontaneity. Making last-minute plans feels stressful instead of exciting because you need time to mentally prepare for everything. You might have difficulty relating to people your own age because their concerns feel trivial to you. While they're worried about what to wear or where to party, you're thinking about survival, about bills, about existential questions that usually don't hit people until midlife. You might feel uncomfortable in settings where people are being carefree and reckless because that kind of abandon feels dangerous to your nervous system. You've seen what happens when people let their guard down. You've experienced the consequences of not being prepared. So you stay vigilant. You stay controlled. You stay isolated in your seriousness while everyone else seems to be enjoying life in a way that feels completely inaccessible to you. You might also notice that you're drawn to older people, that you feel more comfortable in their company because they understand wariness, they understand complexity. They don't expect you to perform youth in a way that feels fake. With them, your heaviness makes sense. With them, you don't have to pretend. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with feeling older than your age. It's the loneliness of not being understood, of feeling like you're living in a different time zone than everyone around you. People tell you to loosen up, to have fun, to stop being so serious, but they don't understand that you can't just flip a switch, that your nervous system has been programmed differently, that what looks like seriousness to them is actually hypervigilance to you. It's not a choice. It's a survival mechanism that you can't turn off just because someone tells you to relax. And so you learn to perform, you learn to laugh at the right moments, to pretend you're carefree, to hide the exhaustion behind a smile. But inside, you feel like an actor playing a part, like you're wearing a costume of youth that doesn't quite fit. And that performance is exhausting. It adds to the very weariness that makes you feel old in the first place. Now, let's talk about the physical manifestations, because feeling older than your age isn't just psychological. It shows up in your body. You might experience chronic fatigue that no amount of sleep fixes. You might have aches and pains that doctors can't explain. You might feel physically heavy, like gravity is pulling you down harder than it pulls everyone else. This isn't psychosomatic in the dismissive sense. This is your body expressing what your mind has been holding. Trauma and chronic stress live in the body. They create inflammation. They disrupt your hormones. They throw your nervous system into disarray. A study from Harvard Medical School found that people who experience significant childhood adversity show higher rates of chronic health conditions in adulthood, including autoimmune disorders, cardiovascular disease, and chronic pain. Their bodies literally age faster. And beyond the medical conditions, there's just the felt sense of heaviness, of being tired in a way that rest doesn't touch. Because you're not just physically tired, you're soul tired. You're tired of being strong, tired of holding it together, tired of feeling like you're the only one who sees how fragile everything is. So what do you do with all of this? How do you live when you feel older than your years? The first thing to understand is that this isn't your fault. You didn't choose to feel this way. You adapted to circumstances that required you to grow up faster than you should have. And that adaptation served you. It kept you alive. It got you through situations that might have broken someone else. So before we talk about healing, we need to acknowledge that you survived, and survival, even when it comes at a cost, is an achievement. But survival mode is not a sustainable way to live. And the work now is to transition from surviving to actually living. That doesn't mean forgetting what you've been through or pretending the heaviness doesn't exist. It means learning to carry it differently. Learning to create space for lightness alongside the weight. One of the most important things you can do is give yourself permission to grieve, to mourn the youth you didn't get to have, to acknowledge that, yes, you did miss out on something, that your peers got to experience a kind of carefree existence that you never did. And that's not fair. It's not right. And you're allowed to be angry about it. You're allowed to be sad about it. That grief isn't self-pity. It's truth. And until you let yourself feel it, it will keep showing up as this vague heaviness that you can't name. So feel it. Cry for the child who had to be serious when they should have been playing. Cry for the teenager who worried about adult problems instead of teenage ones. Cry for the young adult who feels like they've already used up all their energy and they're only just getting started. That crying isn't weakness. It's release. And on the other side of that release is space. Space for something new to emerge. The second thing is to start reclaiming play. I know that sounds ridiculous when you feel ancient inside, but play isn't frivolous. It's how mammals regulate their nervous systems. It's how we learn that the world can be safe, that not everything is a threat, that joy is possible. You don't have to suddenly become carefree and reckless. That wouldn't feel authentic anyway. But you can start small. You can do something purely for the pleasure of it with no productivity attached. You can be silly with a pet. You can dance alone in your room. You can create something with your hands just to see what happens. These small acts of play send a signal to your nervous system that it is safe to let your guard down. That not every moment requires vigilance. And over Chimi, those small moments accumulate. They start to soften the edges of that heaviness. They remind you that you're not just a collection of responsibilities and traumas. You're also a person capable of joy, even if that joy feels unfamiliar at first. The third thing is to find your people. Not people who tell you to lighten up or get over it, but people who understand what it means to carry weight, who have their own old souls, who won't judge you for feeling the way you feel. These relationships are healing not because they fix you, but because they witness you. Because in their presence, you don't have to perform. You don't have to pretend you're younger or lighter or more carefree than you are. You can just be heavy. And they'll sit with you in that heaviness without trying to change it. That kind of acceptance, that kind of being seen exactly as you are, it's medicine. It won't make you suddenly feel young, but it will make you feel less alone. And sometimes that's enough. You also need to challenge the narrative that feeling old is inherently bad. Our culture worships youth. We're told that young equals good and old equals decline. But that's not the full truth. Feeling older than your age also means you have depth, you have perspective, you have emotional intelligence that took others decades to develop. You can hold complexity. You can sit with discomfort. You can see through superficiality in ways that others can't. These aren't consolation prizes. These are real strengths. Yes, you paid a high price for them. Yes, you wish you didn't have to, but they're yours now. And instead of only mourning what you lost, you can also acknowledge what you gained, not to bypass the pain, but to hold both truths simultaneously. You lost something precious and you developed something valuable. Both things can be true. There's a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that trauma, while devastating, can also catalyze profound personal development. Research shows that people who have been through significant hardship often report greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, recognition of new possibilities, and spiritual growth. This doesn't mean trauma is good. It doesn't mean you should be grateful for what you went through, but it does mean that your suffering wasn't meaningless, that the depth you carry, the wisdom you possess, the empathy you extend, these aren't despite your pain, they're because of it. And while you would trade them in a heartbeat for a lighter past, the reality is you can't. So the question becomes, how do you honor what you've become while also making space for who you still could be? Here's something that might surprise you. Feeling older than your age doesn't have to be permanent. Your nervous system is plastic. It can change. You can create new neural pathways that don't revolve around hypervigilance and survival, but it takes intentional work. It takes therapy, whether that's traditional talk therapy, somatic therapy, EMDR, or any modality that helps you process trauma and regulate your nervous system. It takes community. It takes rest, real rest. Not just sleep, but deep nervous system rest, where you're not vigilant even in stillness. It takes saying no to things that drain you, even when saying yes is your default. It takes letting people help you, even when receiving feels impossible. It takes all of these things done consistently over time. And even then, you might never feel as young as people who didn't go through what you went through. But you can feel lighter. You can find moments of genuine ease. You can laugh without waiting for the other shoe to drop. You can exist without constantly bracing for impact. The truth is, you might always feel a little bit older than your age. That ancient part of you might always be there, humming quietly in the background. But it doesn't have to run your entire life. You can learn to hold it gently while also making space for newness, for curiosity, for the kind of aliveness that has nothing to do with your chronological age or your trauma history. You can be both heavy and light, both wise and playful, both wounded and healing, because you're not one-dimensional. You're not just the person who suffered. You're also the person who survived. And more than that, you're the person who's still here, still trying, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, there's a version of life that doesn't feel quite so exhausting. That hope, fragile as it might feel, is proof that you're not as old as you think. Because truly, old souls don't hope. They resign, and you haven't resigned. You're still here, reading this, looking for answers, believing that things could be different. That's not old. That's brave. That's young in the ways that actually matter. So maybe you do feel older than your age. Maybe you always will, but you're also still becoming, still growing, still capable of surprise and change and softness, and that, more than anything else, is what youth really is. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of possibility. And you, despite everything, still have that. You always did. You just forgot for a while. But now you're remembering, and that remembering, that tiny flicker of maybe things could be different, that's where your real life begins. Not the life you should have had, but the life you still get to create. And this time, you get to write it with the wisdom of someone who knows suffering and the hope of someone who refuses to let suffering be the final word. That's the paradox of feeling older than your age. You carry both the weight of the past and the possibility of the future, and learning to hold both without letting either one crush you. That's the work. That's the healing. That's how you finally start living in the present, exactly as you are, exactly where you are, exactly how old you feel, because you don't need to feel younger to be worthy of rest, of joy, of a life that doesn't exhaust you. You just need to be you. Heavy, tired, wise, wounded, hopeful, human, you. And that's enough. It's always been enough. You just needed someone to tell you that. So I'm telling you now, you're enough. Exactly as you are. Exactly how you feel. You don't have to earn it by feeling different. You already are